10 years ago, the Abbott government came to power, in part because Australia wanted to secure its borders again. There was a time when John Howard had secured our borders. But Kevin Rudd, Julia Gillard, Chris Bowen and everyone else in Labor thought that that was all a bit too tough. So let's find a way to reopen them. And they did, and the boats came. 50,000 people came, many people died on that perilous journey. And in the 10 years since, politics in Australia has been absolute. People coming here illegally by boat is not tolerated, it is not accepted, and both sides of politics, including one that has seemingly done it more often than the current government, agree to intersect these boats when they come, largely from Indonesia, turn people around and send them back. The only way to come to Australia is legally, and if you want to be a refugee, well, you come from other parts of the world via refugee camps. At the height of last year's election campaign, Anthony Albanese got himself into quite a bother. You see, he wanted to maintain the turnaround system, one that he had previously said he wouldn't be able to do as Prime Minister, and by all accounts he's been able to continue that system while Prime Minister. But to all those people who weren't refugees, part of the 50,000 who came here via boat, he made a decision to make them permanent citizens, essentially sending a message back that if you're willing to wait, as uncomfortable as the wait may end up being, you will eventually become a citizen with full rights here in Australia. And now, as government, Anthony Albanese and his immigration minister has decided to increase the number of places that we have in this country for refugees to come via the camps around the world. About 20,000 people, of course, moved to that permanent visa status, but now our refugee intake is going to be 20,000 people a year. A small football stadium of people from the entire world to come here as refugees. And that's part of our responsibility as an international citizen. Whether that number is too high or too low is another debate for another time. But while all of this has been happening, of course, the immigration story of this government is to bring in an extra 900,000 people to the country in the next 2 years. As we've told you over the past few days, forgive me, more than 75% of that number have already been achieved, meaning we're going to be way more than 900,000 by this time next year. But it seems that while the boats may have stopped, the number of people claiming asylum once they eventually get to Australia has been increasing. Today, a number that should have made much bigger headline news, but because the assumption is if you can afford a plane ticket here and a return one, well then the chances of somebody claiming refugee status in this country seems to fall. Well, have a look at this. More than 2,000 people who arrived here by largely plane have asked for asylum protection. Now remember, for those who get asylum protection, where you have to go is from the place of which you are fleeing to the nearest safe port. The joy of Australia being an island nation is that unless we're talking about a Pacific Island nation, New Zealand or Indonesia, maybe Papua New Guinea at a stretch, there are no countries that are physically close to us that the safest port of call is somewhere that is Australia. In fact, it is many, many, many countries before Australia. Well, we now see that it is a 3-year high in the month of August for the number of people who've been claiming asylum when they come to the country. Asylum seeker applications hit a 3-year high in August, with the coalition saying that the federal government was making a mess of migration. In August, 2,164 applications for onshore visa protections were filed with the federal government. It is the highest monthly amount in more than 3 years since borders reopened after the pandemic. Now again, every one of the places that somebody who claims asylum once they eventually get here, by boat, by plane or any other way you can possibly get yourself here, well of course it takes away from somebody who is in one of the official refugee camps escaping war and political persecution around the world. So to see that almost 1 in 10 have applied just in the past month would suggest that we have got a little problem here. Today, the opposition pounced on these numbers.
Trouble is, Every time Labor gets in office, they make a mess of immigration. What we're seeing right at this moment is a big Australia approach by stealth. Everything is at record numbers. At the moment, in the last month, only 14 people were sent home who sought asylum and failed. Labor don't want to deal with it.
Now, when Christina Keneally was in the Parliament and she was coming up against Peter Dutton, she tried this line of attack that people claiming asylum via planes were the new boat people. It didn't seem to go very far, but it was an argument that the Labor Party was willing to prosecute in opposition. Of course, today they have virtually no response when they are in government in a position to be able to stem this flow. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to stop every single person who wants to claim asylum. But what can we do to tighten the system? Because Australians are very generous to refugees, genuine refugees. But our assumption is that they come from places where thousands or hundreds of thousands, or sometimes even more, people are waiting in United Nations camps around the world. It should concern you, as it concerns me, the silence that has come from the government about what are they doing to guarantee that when somebody arrives in this country, they plan to holiday, work, but ultimately leave the country. A record number of people saying that they are now refugees in just August alone, highest number in 3 years.